whether encountering this different sort of spirituality had any spiritual effect on Colin.
It's an absolutely valid question to ask. After all, writing a book like this, you submit to these kinds of inquiries quite willingly. But the answer is not very satisfactory. I'd love to give a narrative of enlightenment or catharsis or something, but it wasn't quite like that. I was, in the encountering with Tibetan Buddhism, I think the effect on me was not very simple. I was, in a way, bringing with me all the desire we have, that those we love survive, to a culture which says that's irrelevant. They're saying the condition of salvation in Buddhism is the elimination of the individual. You lose it. And what matters in the world is not individual survival, of course. It's the weight of karma, of good or evil in the world. And it's a very grand and spacious tradition, but it gives us no comfort. And I think all I can say is that by contact with that tradition, it gave a sort of space between my own grief or mourning and the next part of my life. It's a little difficult to define. Maybe I could say that it may have made me more resigned or accepting, let's say, of my own mortality. You find yourself is less important. I mean, Buddhism will hold that. And I think perhaps I felt that more than that my family were less important. And that was a sort of step, if you like, towards a Buddhist outlook. But that's as far as I could go.
Colin, I seem to remember from the late 60s, your third book was on Jerusalem, and that you stayed in a religious house of nuns, was it, to research a book on the Holy City. So presumably in the last 40 years, your worldview has changed enormously. So to put you on the spot.
I stayed with nuns, but I was already agnostic. I stayed with a Polish community in Jerusalem, you're quite right, and continue to be sympathetic. Belief fascinates me. I had belief, and maybe it's nostalgia. But I have what interests me, I think, in travel writing is primarily what people believe, where they place their values, whether they're political or personal or religious, rather than their material conditions, say. And yes, I in Jerusalem, naturally, I was interested in Christian sects, and these were Roman Catholic nuns. But I did realize, too, although you say you're agnostic, in that book on Jerusalem, I was writing, of course, about Judaism and Islam as well. And I got several late letters from readers saying either Islamic or Jewish, saying how Christian my outlooks were now. And I thought I was being beautifully balanced and tolerant, but of course one's whole background denies that. Yes.
Here comes the mic. Here, just wait for the microphone.
Thanks. I also went to Mount Kailash, and I was given your book this year by a friend of mine. And I have to say, upon reading it, that I'm going to read more of your books, because actually I haven't, and this was an introduction to your work. But you really captured the place so incredibly. It took me back in many, many ways. But my question is that if there was one moment that was your highlight or the most poignant moment, in the landscape or on the or on the Kora around Mount Kailash, what would that have been?
The most what moment? Sorry,
Poignant.
Poignant. Oh, a sad moment. I think I was going around the north face of Mount Kailash, which, as you can remember, that terrible steepness, 5,000 feet sheer, lined with ice. And it was rather late and very cold. And I had there's a little guidebook to Kailash in English, very skimpy thing. And I'd read it, and I had not taken it in very well, but it said, the north face of Kailash is, it resembles Mount Eiger seen from Grindelwald. And Grindelwald was where my sister had been killed. And so it was, in a way, shocking. I had the north face of both mountains is very fearful, in a way. So that, I have to say, is the most poignant moment.
I was also lucky enough to go to Mount Kailash in '94, and to me it was also a very special, personal and wonderful, wonderful experience, most profound probably in my life. What I also loved about it was that it was away from all the politics of Tibet, and it still was sacred, and you didn't have the politics. And I'm interested in really the picture now. I hear they want to make it into a sort of big tourist destination, the Chinese authorities, and I'm interested in seeing, is it going to lose its specialness, I suppose?
Sorry, the question was what's happening to Mount Kailash now, and that the Chinese have plans for developing it as a tourist, as a Western venue. And when were you there? How long ago? Was it? 94. That's very early. Yes, the Chinese have had plans. There was some ridiculous idea that they might even create a road around the mountain instead of pilgrims circling it on foot as they do, usually in the case of the Hindus taking 3 or 4 days, that you'll be able to sort of go around it on a motorbike or something. They've dropped that, as far as I know, for the moment. What I did find was that I was there in Sagadawa, which is the Buddhist holy month, as you know, and they had that ceremony of raising a pole there, which probably is an old shamanistic ceremony, I think, recreating a time when heaven and earth were joined, as they imagine. And when I arrived at that ceremony, I found the Chinese police and soldiers were monitoring it very heavily. They'd managed to get their trucks to that part of the valley, and the Tibetans, about 1,000 Tibetan pilgrims, were celebrating the raising of this pole. And there were a good 200 Chinese soldiers there and police monitoring them. And that was the worst sign of intrusion, the fear that all autocracies have of spontaneous gatherings. I have to say that the soldiers were sort of aggressively on patrol. They had riot shields and helmets and stuff, and they were marching around among the pilgrims. Pilgrims looked straight through them. It was absolutely fascinating, as if the Tibetans were imagining they just didn't exist. And they went on hurling that tsampa into the air and praying and prostrating themselves before Kailash. And the Chinese sentries all standing there solidly with their rifles and things. And it was just as if they didn't exist to the Tibetans. It was fascinating. We saw two cultures just weren't seeing one another.